video there. And she is the editor of Sister Vegan, Black Female Vegans Speak on Food, Identity, Health, and Society. She just got her PhD from UC Davis, Geography, and she's an amazing speaker. I'm going to let her take that over.
Good evening, afternoon. I'm going to jump right into it because I got a late start on my own fault. Rushed over from Berkeley. My car with 2 preschool-age children who were not having it. And I never actually drive here. I usually take the train with my bike, but I forgot the parking thing, so I parked way on the outskirts and was like rushing with a double stroller. And got here on time almost. Just wanted to thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm a newly minted PhD, and I wanted to share with you some of the work I did as a doctoral student. And what I'll be talking about is actually a small snippet of the dissertation work. It's a chapter from the work. And of course, I can't read a whole chapter, so I've consolidated to talk. It's about 40 minutes long, with hopefully a room of questions. And also, this work also reflects what I want to do in the future. I want to address these questions. They haven't been actually addressed fully with the dissertation. The dissertation kind of opens the door to investigating these issues, and I'm hoping in the near future, if I can get employment as a postdoc or assistant professor, I can work on these issues even more. So today, the name of my talk is called Never Be Silent on Trayvon Martin, PETA, and the Packaging of Neoliberal Whiteness, which is the second chapter of my dissertation. And veganism is the belief that one should not consume animals or animal byproducts. Despite representing less than 1% of the population, the popularity in veganism is on the rise in the USA. USA vegans' practices matter, and vegan food politics encompass many issues that extend and reflect larger political and cultural ideologies, such as the normalization of globalized capitalism, heteronormative gender roles, and racial power dynamics. This talk will attempt to address these issues by exploring the following questions. How are everyday vegan food objects experienced through racial hierarchies of power, geopolitically and psychically? And how do vegan objects represent spaces of, well, that's not right now. How are signs of food ethics perceived, and how can such interrogations reveal how phenomena such as racism, neoliberalism, and globalized capitalism are normalized or rejected? To explore these questions, I will engage critical race and materialist analysis of the meanings PETA has applied to specific cruelty-free commodities in their vegan shopping guide. And PETA is the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. It's a pro-vegan animal rights organization. Critical race materialism is engaging in a materialist analysis of objects to understand how these cultural objects reflect racial power dynamics and structures. PETA is the premier pro-vegan organization in the world and sets the standard for mainstream vegan rhetoric, particularly in the global North and West. My analysis will reveal how PETA's marketing of vegan products as cruelty-free conceals human exploitation that makes these foods possible. I also show how PETA's anti-racist use of Trayvon Martin's 2012 murder for their new campaign signify how both the organization's post-humanist and post-racialist work conceal the violence of neoliberalism and racism. In essence, PETA promotes and packages their popular form of vegan ethics through what I refer to as neoliberal whiteness. This is because PETA promotes products that A, rely on racialized human exploitation, and B, assume that everyone has a white middle to upper class relationship with food access, food memory, and food ethics. Okay. So what is critical studies of whiteness and how does it apply to understanding neoliberalism and world systems? So formal imperialism and legalized racism were replaced with neoliberalism at the end of the 20th century. Neoliberalism promised global justice for the victims of racialized colonialism by insisting that an open and free market, capitalist competition, and individual responsibility would create economic balance and prosperity for all, therefore eradicating racism. However, critical race materialism argues that racism was not eradicated, but in fact reconfigured in a way that fits the investments of the global north, mostly white population. This reconfiguration is called coloniality. I will be also using the term neoliberal whiteness to articulate the conscious or unconscious promotion and advancement of the beliefs, practices, values, and ideals of Euro-American white culture, especially when those cultural values are represented as the norm. And that's from Lloyd Pierce's work. This definition of whiteness is rooted in a genealogy of recent but strong canon of critical theory. Works within the canon collectively articulate how contemporary whiteness is formed by heteronormativity, post-racialism, neoliberalism, Christianity, consumer capitalism, patriarchy, and upper middle class sensibilities. I will be mostly using the term neoliberal whiteness to describe this contemporary post-empire era of racial power structures and capitalism. And this is an era of racial power that reflects the climate in which the PETA Vegan Guide was created and situated within. Neoliberalism operates as a major component in forming the racialized consciousness of the global north and west. Hence, I'll be using the term racialized consciousness, which will help examine the ways in which consciousness is shaped in terms of white racist social structures. How do PETA and their use of vegan commodities and Trayvon Martin reflect such white racist social structures? Though there are many other well-known animal liberation organizations throughout the United States, it is PETA that is the #1 household name in connection to animal rights and veganism. PETA has over 2 million members and is the most recognized pro-vegan animal rights organization in the world. For PETA, choosing to go vegan is about moral obligations to non-human animals, as well as no longer remaining silent about the tremendous amount of suffering that animal commodities have created for animals. PETA should be understood as being a pro-vegan animal rights organization first and foremost. PETA's founder and spokesperson, Ingrid Newkirk, believes that social justice activism based on identity politics cannot achieve liberation for all, including animals. For her, human beings should be in solidarity with all beings and not focused on identity politics, such as identifying as African American. For her, we are all human. Furthermore, Newkirk prefers that PETA does not confine the label of women to human beings. Instead, women should encompass all females of all species, such as the hens whose reproductive systems have been commoditized to produce babies that are then taken away from them for human consumption. Upon learning about animal exploitation, tens of thousands of people have chosen to become members of PETA. Central to PETA is teaching its supporters to buy vegan products as the ultimate signifier of being cruelty-free. PETA's Vegan Shopping Guide, which I'll refer to as VSG from now on, teaches people that they can eradicate animal cruelty through consumerism. On the introduction to their Vegan Shopping Guide, which is only accessible online, PETA writes, "It's never been easier or tastier to give your kitchen a cruelty-free makeover. Major health food chains chock full of animal-friendly fare are popping up everywhere, and mainstream supermarkets have become meccas for followers of meat and dairy-free diets. The best part, with PETA's shopping guide, you don't have to strain your eyes." PETA's focus on the kitchen as a site to stock ethical food products becomes a space to create an ethical vegan body. It symbolizes the potential buying power of creating spaces of animal liberation. However, who has such easy access to so many vegan choices? On their produce shopping guide section, PETA has written, quote, "It's easy as pie to get your 5 a day, the number of servings of fruits and vegetables recommended by the American Cancer Society when you eat a vegetarian diet. Fruits and vegetables are great sources of essential vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants," end quote. Yes, it appears to be obvious that produce is by default cruelty-free of animal products. However, what is not being made transparent is that the people who are able to follow this guide must have access to produce that will satisfy these daily nutritional requirements. Such access typically includes well-stocked grocery stores and/or farmers markets. Access doesn't just mean geographically close, but also includes monetary access as well. Implicit in this guide is that everyone has the privilege of consumer choice and the money to enact it. There is a significant discrepancy between those who can afford and get transportation access to a diverse variety of produce versus those who cannot. The former are predominantly white, middle to upper class demographic. The latter tend to be non-white and are low-income populations. Not only are the latter collectively unable to gain easier access to a diverse variety of produce, they are quite often the very people who work within the most underpaid, unequal, and dangerous spaces of food production that make the items in the VSG easy as pie. A significant number of low-income and communities of color simply do not have access to healthier food options, as these communities are overrun by liquor stores, fast food restaurants, and convenience stores. Despite the contemporary scholarship that shows how such structural racism impedes food choice, this distinctly racialized and class reality goes unmentioned in the VSG, as well as the entire PETA.org website. Hence, PETA's shopping guide acts as a map to navigate consumers through and to what they assume they already have access to, a well-stocked grocery store. Furthermore, I will show how the guide's language assumes that everyone has a white nostalgic relationship with food. On the refrigerated and frozen food section of the VSG, PETA.org writes this introductory paragraph. Convenient foods can be lifesavers for busy families on the go. Veggie lunch meats are the perfect filler for a low-fat, high-protein sandwich, while veggie hot dogs and burgers with tater tots on the side will quickly become the kids' most requested 10-minute meal. Frozen burger crumbles make veganizing grandma's spaghetti sauce or secret meatloaf recipe a snap. Vegan versions of your favorite comfort foods, from pizza to pot pie to butter pecan ice cream, can be found in the frozen section of most supermarkets and health food stores. Go up to the attic and dust off your TV tray. New selections of vegan TV dinners are sprouting up in your grocer's freezer case all the time. The above paragraph is laden with language that symbolizes the authentic white American family culinary experience. As a marketing ploy, it does make sense that PETA would select the aforementioned products as examples of what everyone yearns for when they think of American convenience foods. We're not addressing a specific racial or ethnic group in the USA. The default marketing language is universal or post-racial approach that is actually embedded with codes of neoliberal whiteness. Hence, an authentic American experience is a white experience. Prepackaged and already made to buy hot dogs, burgers, tater tots, pot pie, and pizza vividly ensure that going vegan means one will not lose access to these cozy comfort foods from a bygone era. Such objects of convenience have come to define the post-World War II white American identity. Such convenience foods were introduced to women as necessary items to please the bellies of their husbands and children. To become the new modern citizen, one was expected to adhere to the ideology that material accumulation is a sign of white progress and being civilized. Also, when PETA writes, quote, veganizing grandma's spaghetti sauce or secret meatloaf recipe is a snap, end quote, it is marketing a scheme that signifies nostalgia of grandmothers who cooked homemade food for their children. Such nostalgia can be easily purchased via the promise of food technologies. However, there are many people in which the mention of grandma's spaghetti sauce and secret meatloaf do not elicit memories of their grandmother's cooking. For example, my grandmother and many other people of African descent experienced elders making traditional soul food, which did not include spaghetti or meatloaf. Such elders prepared meals that did not reflect PETA's taken for granted whiteness, which is assumed in PETA's marketing of vegan convenience foods. The aforementioned convenience foods also signify a collective American relationship with food objects that did not exist before World War II. Access to prepackaged, already made foods on the shelves of major grocery stores that completely obscure its genealogy in a liberal market economy. The ingredients that comprise the perfectly packaged food objects start off as natural resources, such as plants or animals. They then must be raised, farmed, cultivated, harvested, transported, processed, packaged, and ultimately sold to the new modern convenience shopper. Mythologizing via branding obscures the injustice disproportionately enacted upon racialized minorities that harvest these resources. For example, who picks the tomatoes that end up as ingredients in the foods that PETA's frozen food guides section promotes? Although this is only a small sample, here are some of the brands approved by PETA's vegan shopping guide. Amy's Spinach Pizza, Amy's Roasted Vegetable Pizza, Moosewood Mediterranean Tomato and Rice Soup, Tofuti Pizza Pizzazz, and Eve's Veggie Pizza Pepperoni. What these products all have in common is the ingredient of the tomato. Tomatoes are obviously not from an animal. However, missing from the guide is a critical genealogy of the tomato commodity chain's role in sustaining the gender and racial exploitation of females under NAFTA. North America's access to tomatoes rely mostly on the labor of racialized minority females, many who work in the most environmentally toxic and inhumane conditions to bring tomatoes to North America. However, to understand the implications of North Americans having access to tomatoes all year round, it is important to understand the intensive, multi-layered genealogy of the tomato's roots. In what is now the nation of Mexico, colonialism destroyed the culture and biodiversity of the indigenous people's land-based livelihood. Since European colonialism, indigenous people of Mexico were forcibly removed from their land, leaving most of them with only one option for survival: working for unlivable wages and relying on foods that are imported to them from the USA for their own sustenance. In 1994, the implementation of the North American Fair Trade Agreement, NAFTA, would also come to exacerbate problems of inequality and exploitation of indigenous populations, making it possible for North Americans to have even cheaper access to tomatoes all year round. NAFTA was conceived in order to create the world's largest free market, integrating the economic sectors of USA, Canada, and Mexico. Unfortunately, what NAFTA did was also allow market interests to trump basic human rights of already vulnerable populations, such as indigenous Mexican laborers. NAFTA represents how global industry employs racist and sexist stereotypes about females to maximize profit. There is an institutionalized belief that females make better tomato harvesters and maquiladora laborers. This is not only sexual division of labor, it is racialized sexual division of labor. Indigenous females are hired to work outside in the fields, harvesting the tomatoes. However, none of the sorters or packers is indigenous, but rather are light-skinned mestizas. Already using Mexico's racist, colorist, and sexist beliefs about indigenous people, tomato corporations use the trope that indigenous women are closer to the land and more robust. Hence, these women should be able to endure tremendous amounts of sun exposure as well as pesticides sprayed onto the fields. They are also paid 10 times less than the mestizas in the packaging plants. Housed in deplorable huts without water, electricity, stores, or transport, they come as families to work in the fields and moved from harvest to harvest. Because their own regions offer even less opportunity, women are forced to suffer these jobs and the racist treatment built into them. And that, a lot of that work was done by a woman named Barnt, who looks at the tomato trail and how the exploitation of women is clearly very racialized. And it's a huge problem that is not being spoken of in the USA by the mainstream. NAFTA and the World Trade Organization are newer and ever-expanding mechanisms to help achieve global economic power for the USA, which began to cast transnational political economic issues in a newly racialized mold. This process reached new heights at the 2001 UN World Conference on Racism in Durban, South Africa, where the US did its best to undermine and marginalize demand for global racial injustice. Within the socio-historical context of European and American colonialism, to undermine global racial justice means that it is still ethical to enslave and exploit a highly disproportionate number of non-white people of the global South for the economic and social interests of largely modern white middle to upper class global North and their corporate interests. NAFTA is an example of sustaining an underlying narrative that there are permissible spaces of racialized gender suffering. Simultaneously, the vegan cheese pizzas that the VSG advocates suggest that it is not acceptable that cows suffer in farming spaces to produce milk for cheese, hence the creation of vegan cheese. Advocating vegan cheese pizza as cruelty-free allows PETA and its followers to be consciously anti-speciesist. And speciesism is when human beings think they're better than any other species so they can eat them or exploit them. Simultaneously, they are unconsciously uncritical or unaware of the racist spaces and economic policies that make so many vegan commodities like tomatoes possible. It is noteworthy that the VSG or PETA.org do not provide 1 or 2 lines that ask readers to ask food companies about the quality of life of the people who harvest these ingredients. They are only encouraged to think about the quality of life of the animals. The tomato commodity chain is only one aspect of how racism and NAFTA make the foods in the PETA's vegan shopping guide possible. In the next section, I'm going to look at So Delicious, an internet website, which is advocated by PETA. And Soy Delicious is the non-dairy dessert that a lot of vegans tend to consume. On the VSG snacks, written is the following, quote, "Whether salty snacks or sweet treats are your passion, you'll find lots to love in the snack aisle. Most pretzels, popcorn, and corn and potato chips are animal-free. Check the labels, you'll find that a surprising number of cookies, crackers, pastries, energy bars, and other snack foods are free of hidden animal ingredients like eggs, butter, gelatin, whey, and casein. Chocoholics, rejoice. It's all too easy to get your fix with chocolate cookies and dairy-free dark chocolate chips and bars." PETA then proceeds to advocate over 150 snacks, including Soy Delicious chocolate desserts and Nestle double chocolate thin mints. On their Our Favorite Products section of the VSG, Soy Delicious brand makes it to the top of PETA's list. However, this favorite of PETA holds a secret. There are thousands of children on cocoa farms who work as slaves to harvest cocoa for the global Western market. The Ivory Coast exports 50% of the cocoa beans that are used in global chocolate production. Despite the human rights violations that cocoa harvesting produces, PETA advocates Nestle chocolate snacks and Soy Delicious frozen vegan desserts. PETA simply promotes them as cruelty-free. However, in 2007, Soy Delicious frozen vegan desserts are described as the following, quote, "While they're not a company big enough to purchase fair trade chocolate, Turtle Mountain doesn't use bone char refined sugar, and they are certified organic. The company is also a supporter of the Sea Turtle Restoration Project, an organization helping to prevent sea turtles' extinction. What better reason do I need to buy soy ice cream but to help sea turtles?" End quote. If Turtle Mountain could not afford to buy from sources that guarantees no slave labor, why didn't they stop purchasing cocoa altogether? Saving sea turtles and using sugar free from bone char refinement is what makes this vegan treat ethical and cruelty-free. It cannot be overlooked that the ethics surrounding cocoa and sugar for Turtle Mountain and their customers is not equally as important as ensuring that sugar is bone char free, and sea turtles are given the right to self-determination and survival. If it were, perhaps Turtle Mountain would have received enough complaints from consumers or even boycotts to start buying cocoa that is certified slavery-free. On the Soy Delicious product certifications page, listed are definitions of 9 quality-specific labels for the consumer, including certified vegan. None of the certification labels indicate the quality of treatment that the laborers receive. Even though the company claims to now use some fair trade cocoa, it is noteworthy that there is no label and definition for that quality attribute. Furthermore, everything about their products assures the customer that their purchases are quote-unquote guilt-free, as all the images on their site convey joy. Missing are depictions of those harvesting the ingredients for Turtle Mountain. On the community section, there are 5 images. All pictures show white people and 1 donkey. I actually have that image. I couldn't get it to print out or to go on my slideshow. The latest supporter of Turtle Mountain products is the Breeze family. Pictured on the website is NFL quarterback Drew Brees. Brees is holding 9 different types of Soy Delicious products as his wife feeds him a chocolate-covered frozen treat. Turtle Mountain writes, quote, "The donation amount is completely uncapped, so indulge away. The more delicious, creamy ice cream you bite, lick, and scoop, the more good we do together," end quote. Hence, one is receiving double satisfaction from the taste of the dessert and by knowing that their dollars are supporting a quote-unquote good cause. To encourage one to buy even more Turtle Mountain products, 0.75% of the net sales will go to the Breeze family's Breeze Dream Foundation charity. Below is how Turtle Mountain describes their products. At Turtle Mountain, LLC, we are keenly aware of how foods affect a person's well-being and quality of life. As we listen to the needs and desires of our customers, we have learned that the success of our products is as much about what they do not contain as it is about what they do contain. To this end, we use only the highest quality ingredients and employ the most stringent testing, production, and packaging methods, end quote. If they are keenly aware of how food affects a person's well-being, what person are they referring to? Why isn't the consumer educated about the needs and desire of our commodity chain laborers? or the health of the communities from which these ingredients are extracted, harvested, and commoditized? The answer lies in geopolitical consumer privilege. USA and Canada are where their products are sold. The person that truly matters is the consumer who dictates what the neoliberal market should provide for them. The well-being and quality of life of the harvesters of ingredients that have long been associated with racialized slavery, such as sugar, vanilla, coffee, cocoa beans, are completely invisible on this PETA-promoted website, as well as the vegan shopping guide itself. Even though PETA does promote itself to be dedicated to and making transparent how animals suffer for human gratification, they don't educate their supporters to think what cruelty-free means within a neoliberalist consumer capitalist economy. The guide fails the humans who harvest the vegan ingredients. By not providing any information to the winner about the commodity chain, VSG signifies how their post-humanist approach to veganism actually masks a post-racial consumer culture invested in not really knowing where products originate. A byproduct of neoliberalism, post-racialism not only epitomizes PETA and its VSG, it also maintains structured ignorance about the significance of race and whiteness as organizing principles of the commodity chain. As a matter of fact, I would argue that PETA's latest Never Be Silent campaign and their employment of Trayvon Martin's murder as what real racism looks like brilliantly orients their supporters away from fully engaging with how racism and whiteness are embedded in the food commodity chain and upheld by PETA's specific form of vegan consumer activism. In 2012, PETA released their new campaign, Never Be Silent, which featured a 3-minute video premiering on their main website, prime.peta.org. Even though there are many things occurring on the homepage of the campaign, I focused on PETA's introductory message for the Never Be Silent campaign video, which is written by the president, Ingrid Newcourt. Titled, Trayvon Martin's Case Reminds Us Never Be Silent, the reader is greeted with the following slide. Quote, we all have prejudices to dispel, the need to get away from thinking that I am important and special, and you are not, and the frightened mindset that tells us what certain others are of no consequence. And homophobia, racism, sexism, speciesism, ageism, anti-Semitism, and other isms not only separate us from one another, but also can lead from words to weapons, end quote. The above preface to the video explains how Martin's racially motivated murder is in fact connected to animal exploitation and suffering. Hence, both are part of the same interlocking system that makes all oppressions possible in PETA's mind. This is a fundamental tenet of PETA's rhetoric. Further into the message, Ingrid Newkirk also explains PETA's understanding of how racism and slavery used to be the accepted norm. She writes, quote, much of our bias is born of misunderstanding, of ignorance. In the days of institutionalized slavery in America, many educated people honestly believed that Africans could not feel pain nor experience parental love as white people do. So it was acceptable to brand slaves and to auction off their children. Although we have, in theory, abolished human slavery, recognized women's rights, and stopped child labor, we continue to enslave other species who, if we simply pay attention, show quite clearly that they experience parental love, pain, and the desire for freedom just as we do, end quote. PETA's definition of anti-racism is epitomized by the condemnation of Trayvon Martin's murder and antebellum black slavery. Real racism is overt acts of violence, such as racial profiling, lynching, or enslaving black people. It is not structural or covert in PETA's mind. Furthermore, Newkirk's epistemology of human slavery and child labor as having been eradicated is a profound signifier of how neoliberal whiteness shapes consciousness and one's relationship and role to the commodity chain. Analysis of both tomato and cocoa ingredients and the brands advocated by PETA concretely show that forced child labor and slavery have not been eradicated. As a matter of fact, there are more human beings enslaved now than during the antebellum black slavery era. Though nuanced, Newkirk presents the definitions of racism and slavery within the context of colonial whiteness. Coming from the standpoint of the global north, concealed is how neoliberalism has transformed racism and white supremacy into unrecognizable and invisible processes to its beneficiaries. From PETA's definition of racism, the structural racism that makes NAFTA possible, resulting in cheap commodities, are not even named or recognized as racism. In this sense, quote, neoliberalism seeks to disconnect itself from its white supremacist history by re-articulating an anti-racist counter-whiteness. The latter aims to differentiate itself from white supremacy by particularizing itself. It thereby insists upon the definitive discontinuity of its own enterprise and of that of white supremacy, end quote. Ingrid Newkirk recognizes that she is not the type of white person from the era of antebellum slavery or Jim Crow, who honestly believed that Africans were inferior and deserving of racist-based exploitation. Condemning Trayvon Martin's murder and antebellum slavery creates a counter-whiteness to the one exemplified by Martin's murderer and institutional slavery of Africans. Newkirk's counter-whiteness represents a post-empire white consciousness that condemns overt forms of American racism and white supremacy. Now, PETA has a long history of using references to overt racist atrocities for its own animal rights agenda. Rarely, if ever, has the organization actually questioned how they frame the problem of racism, or how they collectively benefit from structural racism and perpetuate neoliberalism as the given norm. To explore their absence of critical engagement with neoliberal whiteness, I typed the words racism and racist into the search engine of prime.peta.org. Search results showed 3 articles, Trayvon Martin being one of them. Typing in the words NAFTA, neoliberal, and whiteness in the search yielded no results. Even though PETA.org has hundreds of articles and blog posts, there are no other articles or blog posts that focus on how racism manifests beyond individually violent racist acts, Jewish Holocaust, or antebellum slavery. The purpose of this exercise was to see how these concepts affect PETA's framing of racism, anti-racism, as well as, quote-unquote, never be silent. This framing of racism also reveals the potential limitations of vegan activism as a post-humanist endeavor and in an era of neoliberal whiteness. I will show how such post-humanist limitations through a brief analysis of PETA's response to the NAACP's accusations of racism during the year 2005 of their animal liberation campaign. In 2005, PETA launched an extremely controversial campaign. Titled Animal Liberation, the campaign paralleled the root causes of human suffering to the same causes as non-human animal suffering: domination, othering, power, and discrimination. Their campaign did not only rely on text to convey their messages, it employed images of black people in slavery and black men having been lynched. In response to the NAACP, who found the use of the images to be racist, Ingrid Newkirk responded, quote, "We are all animals, so get over it," end quote. Though a post-humanist-oriented response, the desire to have all humans embrace "we are all animals" versus human is a type of white logic. Newkirk's response assumed that every human being has had the same access to and history of humanity, or being humanized, as the white and middle to upper class human demographic has in the USA. Since the era of European colonialism, to undergo the process of white racialization has meant that whites will be treated as human, that they are not an animal. However, black people in the USA collectively equate being referred to or compared to an animal as dehumanizing. During colonialism, animal and subhuman were used to describe and justify the exploitation of Africans for slavery. Decades of such colonial abuse have influenced the collective black consciousness to be on edge, enraged, and always fighting to prove to whites that blacks are human. And I'm going to quote from Angela P. Harris's work on, she does critical studies of animals and critical race theory. She writes, quote, "PETA's animal liberation campaigns, from this vantage point, are white. They assume a comfort in associating oneself with animals and animal issues that people of color can only assume with difficulty," end quote. PETA's 2005 response wasn't just a white racialized vantage point. It was a discourse of rhetorical whiteness, or white talk. As such, PETA functions as a discourse, a fluid sea of values, beliefs, and practices that individuals draw upon, consciously and unconsciously, to exert cultural power and maintain a racial system that keeps whiteness safe as the cultural center. Posthumanism masks such a racial system that keeps neoliberal whiteness safe as the invisible global cultural center. Those such as NAACP, who seek to expose the white standpoint of PETA, are socially placed as impure thinkers because they choose to expose this rhetorical body of whiteness that underlies PETA's activism. PETA's response to the NAACP also reflects popular and neoliberal views about racism in the USA. Now that we live in a post-civil rights era, race and racism are no longer significant impediments for non-white people. The problem that arises from such dominant conceptions of 21st century racial dynamics is that if anyone contests that the USA is a post-racial state, they are accused of using race as an excuse. They are, quote-unquote, playing the race card. In a sense, Newkirk's response was not just post-humanist, it was a post-racial one. Animals could have easily been replaced with, "We are all post-racial, so get over it." Engagement with the potential problems of post-humanist and post-racial veganism and neoliberalism are non-existent among the internet users who have commented on PETA's VSG website. None of the comments show concern for or ask questions about human beings producing the ingredients for PETA's advocated foods. On the baking section of the VSG, the mention of Nestle only comes up because a participant is upset that it is being advocated despite the fact that the company is conducting tea experiments on non-humans. No one mentions that Nestle is notorious for using slavery to harvest the cocoa. On the second page of comments, there is a debate on whether the ingredient taurine in Red Bull is derived from animals or not. Any dialogues about sweeteners, sugar, or cocoa focus more on the nutritional health aspects, or if sugar products advocated use bone char. No one actually refers to the fact that a lot of Haitians are actually exploited and enslaved to harvest the world's sugar. Their produce section yields no comments about the difficulty people may be having of getting fresh produce or racialized human exploitation that it takes to get produce onto people's plates. The comments reflect a collective concern to transition into veganism for animal rights while making sure the brands and ingredients listed on the VSG are healthy and have not been tested on non-human animals. Virtually no comments reflect on how factors such as environmental racism, racialized gentrification, and poverty in the USA determine the ease of food access. Instead, some commenters' challenges are that they still crave certain dairy products and that one teenager can't really convince their family to support them. Overall, PETA's VSG, as well as the letter prefacing Never Be Silent campaign and Newkirk's Get Over It response, reveal a type of impaired consciousness or distorted way of thinking about race as compared to, for example, critical consciousness. My analysis lays the groundwork for one to see how PETA's rhetoric of vegan consumerism as peaceful, nonviolent, and cruelty-free operates, that it is contingent upon racialized human exploitation. Even though PETA's VSG does not promote the violence of eating or killing non-human animals, constructing vegan commodities as cruelty-free is in fact an act of discursive violence because it encourages the concealment of an exploitative commodity chain. It is an example of how colonial forms of racism and whiteness has shifted more towards discursive, structural, and covert processes of coloniality that are upheld by PETA and NAFTA. My analysis of PETA's relationship to food objects, such as tomatoes and cocoa, is not really about animal rights or even veganism at all. What my analysis does suggest is that PETA's framing of cruelty-free is linked to a larger American cultural phenomenon. Beneficiaries of neoliberal capitalist economy do not really want to know from where and how commodities get to them. A process of estrangement erased is the genealogy of how these objects arrived there and how they took on the harmless meaning that they have, such as cruelty-free. Hence, estrangement teaches the holder of such objects that what they have in their hands is pure and innocent, that they have no responsibility to investigate any further how it got there in the first place. Such ideologies fool the subscriber of neoliberal capitalism into thinking they have an active consciousness, when in fact this estrangement encourages a passivity in consciousness. This is exacerbated by the neoliberal politics of a post-racial USA. PETA's two campaign strategies signify how manipulation of concepts such as post-humanism and anti-racism become tools of racial neoliberalism. Such manipulation only serves to conceal the violence of neoliberal whiteness within the commodity chain. It also dismisses the fact that many non-white people do not have the racial privilege to engage in activism, let alone vegan food politics, from a post-racial and post-humanist perspective. After all, Trayvon Martin was killed while trying to get food in a predominantly white neighborhood. Most of mainstream Americans lack critical literacy skills around how their consciousness is shaped by white racist structures within a capitalist moral economy. Research has shown how a significant number of Americans, mostly white, do not even know that structural racism continues to exist. Or if they do know, they lack the critical race literacy skills to actually recognize it as racism. By applying critical race materialist analysis to something as innocent as vegan cruelty-free commodities, I hope this talk and my research will help to move toward creating critical pedagogies of consumption that unmask the realities of racial neoliberalism. Thank you.
Could you go over Trayvon Martin's story? I wasn't familiar with it before.
Okay. I'm sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that. Yeah, when putting this talk together, I had to consolidate a lot to fit it in. I just had to assume what people may or may not know, so that's true. So what happened in the spring of last year, 2012, Trayvon Martin is a 17-year-old who was hanging out at his dad's house and was watching TV, and during the break he decided to go and get some snacks. And his father was in a white gated community. And upon returning from the convenience store, there was one of the people who lived there who unofficially likes to go around the neighborhood to make sure there are no criminals lurking. And he claimed that this young black male, Trayvon's black, tried to attack him, and the guy who was armed with guns, the adult, shot the kid. And then it was found the kid had no weapons on him, and it was kind of weird. So it hasn't actually been proven if the man, George Zimmerman, was actually lying or not. But the particular issue actually raised a lot of anger from many people who are just sick of young black men being racially profiled. And a lot of people are like, how can you not even tell that's a child? Like, I look at the picture, I'm like, that's a child, but I wasn't there, right? So what it actually did represent, because there were so many people who were so upset about it, is just the ongoing problems with just kind of walking around while black in predominantly white spaces. So it was very big. It's still happening now as he's going through the court for them to try to see, you know, what is he innocent, is he lying, and all that stuff. So it basically represents the problems of racial profile and what it means to kind of live in a supposedly post-racial era in America. So that's what Trayvon Martin is all about. And a lot of people, to protest it globally, they went and they sent Skittles wrappers to the police chief that is investigating it. And you can see lots of images of people who decided to wear a hood because the child was wearing a hood when he was walking around the neighborhood before he got killed. So people are wearing hoods to kind of support that, you know, we are all Trayvon Martin, which I have a problem with because if you're white, you're actually not Trayvon Martin. But most black people who are visibly or legible as black in America, they do understand that we all have the potential of just being shot because there is this narrative in America that black people are innately criminal. So that's kind of what that controversy is. That's been about. So,
yes. I have a lot of questions, but I'm just going to ask one.
You can always email me too.
Yeah. My first one is about the kind of like the centering of these particular foods, like pizza and tater tots and a bunch of things that I grew up eating in school, like for school food. And my thing about it is just thinking about, it just seems like, you know, those foods, it's all for marketing, it's all driven by money. They're just trying to go for the biggest market, which, you know, most kids are familiar with those foods, so their kids are gonna when they're going through the market, tug on them, you know, I want that, you know, versus like something that they're not familiar with, which they would not point to and want. And so my question is, so I guess the other side of this is, if they do promote foods that are non-centered foods, and first thing that comes to mind is like ITAL food, right? Like, I grew up in New York, and like ITAL is huge, you know, in the Black community, Black vegan community, Rastafarian community, who are vegan and have foods that are part of their culture, from their culture, that are vegan. And it's not necessarily connected in any way to PETA, as far as I know. But if PETA were to promote ITAL foods, just for an example, it could be seen as a form of co-optation. And so my question is, what do you see as being like a proper way forward in terms of a more multicultural, more multi-ethnic cuisine narrative by PETA and other organizations that promote veganism?
Sure. Well, actually, I want to I don't know if I can answer that without kind of stepping back to let you understand what I was attempting to do. So it's not that I have a problem with PETA centering or packaging through neoliberal whiteness. I don't have a problem with that. My problem is that they're not naming it, or they're not naming it or just saying it. You know, this is, by the way, this is, you know, in part, it's mostly, you know, part of the white cultural America. Like, I'm kind of sick of universalizing everything, but it's not universal. It's more like it assumes everyone has like the white middle class experience. So I guess my problem is that the language assumes that without at least providing one or two lines mentioning, oh, by the way, research shows that there are a significant number of people who don't have this relationship to food, and this is why. So I know PETA, they have they've been trying to reach out to like the Latino market by using particular co-opted cultural images and of the Latin population. And they're already getting slack from that because they basically used light-skinned female celebrities who are half naked. And that's another problem, they're sexist images of women to sell food. So yeah, the whole co-opting, it's really difficult to actually, I think, promote non-white relationship to food in a way that isn't still critiquing capitalism and consumerism. And I actually don't think PETA is interested in that and would ever do it. And actually, yeah, they're just not going to do it. Because all the people that sponsor them, how they get that money, it's like these corporations. Like, they're not going to piss them off. But like I was saying, my problem is that I would like them to at least name or say, by the way, even though animal-free products are cruelty-free, you can also investigate, you know, how human beings are being treated. Or you can also investigate that maybe not everybody thinks about grandma's meatloaf, because there are some folk who have, you know, grandma's fried chicken. And we offer, like, you know, chicken substitutes, you know, I don't know, something like that. That's what my problem is. It's just the assumptions that are made. And I don't actually have a big answer for you, because I've gotten pretty pessimistic about the mainstream vegan animal rights movement in America. It just really feels like they're into promoting that single issue of saving cute, fuzzy animals, not all animals, but specific animals. And I'm hoping that PETA gets millions of dollars. I mean, they get so much money. So when you start looking at that, and that it's supposed to be a nonprofit, but they make so much money. And they make a lot of money by never, ever actually critically looking at, can we ever have social justice if capitalism itself isn't taken down? Like, just not really even engaging with that. So that's like kind of a broader answer to your question. Yes?
I was really interested in the issue of soy as a replacement for everything that's not vegan to begin with, because I know a little bit about the problems with soy, but I was wondering if you had investigated that commodity chain at all, and like the environmental degradation and impacts on communities of the expansion of soy.
Actually, I have not. I try not to focus on a lot that's popular in vegan philosophy, where people are actually like, oh, soy is bad, and soy is... I try to go and look at other things that people aren't looking at. So I know soy is a big problem, and it's a big controversy. I do remember that there were several organizations that were against it, but it was, once again, they were using what I thought was culturally insensitive language and implying that like Asian men are more feminine because of soy, like kind of using, yeah, I know. But like that's how when people aren't conscious of these things, you know. And I remember, I don't even remember what site it was on, but it was out 2 or 3 years ago, and I had forwarded it to somebody, or maybe my sister vegan list, so we could talk about, you know, just even that, we're like, you know, there must be a problem with soy because Asian men are so feminized. Like just like even saying that and not even being critical of that just kind of blew my mind. So that's to the extent where I started engaging in that, was like, oh yeah, let's look at how racism unfolds again without people really realizing it. The other things I did look at in my last chapter, I looked at palm oil. And really looked at how that's being used a lot by not just vegans, but like in general, everything has palm oil in it in America. And how companies like Earth Balance, they're huge with vegans, and they have this, what I say, false green marketing about how, you know, every time you buy a tub of our butter, we'll make sure orangutans are, you know, that were displaced from their natural environment will be put into a nice environment so they can thrive. And I'm just like, well, palm oil is just so bad on so many levels. And what about the indigenous communities that have been greatly affected? And what about the fact that you don't, like, what about people don't really need palm oil to live in America? As oils are a significant amount of calories for like, a lot of indigenous communities that can't have access to it. So those are the things I looked at. But the soy thing, yeah, that's a big thing that it was so popular, I kind of wanted to look at other things.
I guess, can I ask sort of a related question, which is, how much, I guess the problem of promoting consumerism is the answer to these problems? And if you looked into it.
Yeah, that was the last chapter of my dissertation. So I looked at PETA, because they set the standard for the whole rhetoric around ethical and cruelty-free. Then I looked at Afrocentric veganism as like, what is a post-racial model of, I'm sorry, not post-racial, what does a race model of veganism look at? So I looked at Afrocentrism, but I also came to the conclusion that a lot of the people didn't really recognize how capitalism was colonizing their way of even decolonizing the black body through veganism. And the last chapter, I looked at the Food Empowerment Project, where they analyze that you can't possibly have a socially just planet through capitalism, even if it's green capitalism. So just the problem that no one's really looking at consumerism and consumption. And they kind of, you know, they're just very skeptical of that. No matter how like ethically you try to make capitalism, they're finding that even like fair trade isn't really working out. Not everybody wants to, even if it's fair. Not all indigenous communities want to commoditize their resources, and that they're being forced to do it anyway for green capitalism or for the first world and stuff. So I found, at least I'm becoming more pessimistic now, even when I look at things like equal exchange and fair trade. When I was researching and hearing the stories of a lot of people who were like, it doesn't work, or a lot of us coffee growers, a lot of us, we're still not making ends meet even though we're supposed to be doing something that's considered fair trade. So I was like, my problem is that I'm a consumer, like I'm a privileged consumer, I'm never actually, unless I actually am in that space like a laborer, I'm never actually going to know if my food is ethical. That's the thing. And Food Empowerment Project had still found corporations who said that they were fair trade or they were using fair trade, and they found children slavery in spaces where it was supposed to be slave-free. So I was like, I don't know if like green marketing and green products start becoming really popular and people want to buy, then like that's like how is that going to be ethical if it's so profitable? Like, I just, for me, I can't conceive of like greedy profits and green capitalism and social justice working out. But that's just me. After doing this work for 2 years, I'm like, well, I'm not even a vegan, you know. So, all right, but I've been thinking about that too. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is basically any commercially produced food that has this kind of integrated global supply chain can't really be produced truly ethically, is what you're saying, or without some potential negative for somebody involved along.
That's
or
what
are there examples of foods that are commercially produced that would meet kind of the specification of, I just kind of think of Guayaquil, Yerba Mate, the bottle has like 8 certifications. you know? It's like, okay, so they're socially certified, they're fair trade or organic, there's no slavery involved, but is it more the structure and the kind of the nature of the capitalist system, even no matter how far you go into certifying these things, that there will, I think, like you said, there will always be some problem.
I mean, because I know that's a, it's a scale, sure.
Yeah.
Probably the bottle with 8 ethical labels probably is much better than like Frito-Lay company, right?
Yeah.
But when I kept on researching it more and more, I mean, I did find instances where there were communities that, were benefiting, but it just seemed like more and more, it seems like there were just a lot of problems, but you don't see it because unless you grow up in a space of coloniality, you're not really going to see it. So I think the problem with certification too is that one of the people who, I looked at their research to look at how they're looking at fair trade. They were saying none of the indigenous community is even invited into the room to talk about it. And she had said that most of the people who were creating protocols and language around what would be ethical chocolate were mostly white male global northerners. She was just like blown away by that. She's like, why aren't the indigenous people actually allowed in there to actually help construct the language of what like a certified ethical cocoa product would look like? So to answer your question, I don't know. I didn't look at every product that's ever been made. I didn't look at like the most popular vegan products. But I feel like there's probably a range. There's, like I said, Frito-Lay probably has pretty bad human rights violations, but maybe the bottle that you have is probably pretty low on the scale. I guess what I did with my dissertation was just to let people know that be careful, because like if you're being marketed anything, they're trying to sell the sizzle, right? That was the sell the sizzle, not a steak, which isn't very vegan, but and they're trying to sell a myth. They're trying to sell something. They're selling a myth because a product is like innately a product isn't really what they say it is. They're trying to construct it as this myth. So I'm asking people when they read my work not to you don't necessarily have to boycott everything or go vegan or whatever, but just be more critical of so your bottle has 8 certifications on it, but who's making those certifications? Who's behind it? Who's investing in it? Who's not? Who's being allowed at the table to actually make those decisions? So those are the things that I ask people to do. I can't really answer in all if the product is ethical, because I think depending on your actual social and geopolitical status and situation, you have to make those decisions on your own, because not everyone can afford to even buy products that have those a gazillion labels of ethical and organic on it for various reasons. So yeah, I don't know if I can answer. If I answered your question efficiently, but in a nutshell, it's just hard to tell what's being marketed to you, what's truthful, and what's just there for profit. In the back, yes?
Oh, I actually just had, because I started a fair trade venture, and so one of the biggest things that we came into contact with, other than the fact that it doesn't actually challenge the capitalist system because it still relies on a system of consumption, is that certification is extremely expensive and it's extremely timely. So the kinds of communities that would be organizing themselves to get certification, they still a lot of times are relying on assistance from the global north and from these different entities that are organizing it so that they can get certification. So thinking about fair trade as ethical wages or these kinds of things, to get those wages, the sacrifices that have to be made is really long. So I don't know, I didn't mean to.
No, that's good. That's good to know that you are engaging in that type of work and you can actually see what the challenges are.
I'm wondering if you're engaged at all in the domestic fair trade.
Can you say that again?
I'm wondering if you ever engaged at all in the domestic fair trade. So just you stayed sort of in the dynamic of global.
Yeah, that's international. So that's something that I'm not too familiar with yet. I'm getting more interested in, I went to a talk about restaurants and restaurant workers in Oakland. And it's called Behind the Kitchen Door. And I know it's not necessarily looking at domestic fair trade issues, but more or less looking at the author talked about even the people who are the foodies who go to their restaurant and say it's local and it's sustainable. The treatment of the workers it's just so horrible, and the treatment gets worse and the workers get darker as they move further back into the kitchen. So I'm more interested in that now, and maybe even going to restaurants in the Bay Area after maybe listening to or trying to find workers that have been exploited, going to those restaurants that are supposedly so enlightened and engaging in local and sustainable and organic or even vegan. So I'm kind of shifting more into that particular domestic research. Yes?
I'm sorry, but at the beginning you mentioned what you're currently doing and what you're gonna move forward on. Could you explain?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, what I'm currently doing is nothing, because in this economy of looking for a job, I didn't even get an interview, but I'm not bitter. So if I were to get a postdoc or assistant professor job, I wanted to just continue this work, and what I'm interested in is doing more ethnography. So what I did for this work was, because I was always either pregnant or I have 2 really little kids, everything was a cyber ethnography. So I did my work online, looking at these online guides. And what I'm hoping to do now is to go out into the field and analyze the workers' experiences in these particular ethical, organic, sustainable restaurants. And then the other work that I'm hoping to do is looking at alternative Black masculinities and the hip-hop vegan movement. So yes, there are hip-hop vegan Black men, and looking at how they're kind of reshaping the stereotypes of Black masculinity through vegan activism and a green consciousness, but using the language and pedagogies of hip-hop. So I'm really interested in that, because I'm actually sick of my Black brothers being criminalized, and always like Black people are useless, they can't help themselves in the health, they just don't know how to eat right. I'm really sick of that. So I want to go out to several sites and talk to people like Bryant Terry, DJ Coven Motivation, who's out in Denver, and really talk to them and do that research to see how they're engaging in a type of, I guess, vegan decolonial race-conscious activism that I guess counters a lot of what I found in PETA's cruelty-free activism. That's what I'm hoping to do. Thanks. Yes?
I mean, how do you view veganism, like the positionality of veganism itself? I mean, it kind of seems like it's, I mean, do you see it as something that's just everyone can kind of do, or has it been promoted by, some groups more than others throughout history? I mean, because there's you're saying PETA is kind of promoting this white brand of veganism, and there's other brands out there, but is veganism kind of a balanced thing in and of itself, or does it start from some kind of unequal place to begin with?
Well, I think food access in itself starts from some unequal place because of the way resources to healthy living spaces and food are really organized through race and class in America, and gender to some extent. So I think a whole diet, whether it's an omnivorous diet or a vegan diet, isn't necessarily easy or easily accessible or balanced if you don't have the access that you need in America. So I know I've spoken to a lot of people who are low-income vegans, and they struggle with trying to find fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains in their communities. So it's not necessarily that it's hard to be a vegan, but they were having struggles with health disparities and health when they were omnivores. I think being a vegan is probably really difficult in particular parts of the world, especially if you can't grow food. So I actually don't think it's a universal, like PETA thinks everyone should go vegan, but like if you live somewhere where you can't even grow food, how is that even possible? I mean, actually grow plant-based food. So I think veganism, or there is no diet, like a paleo diet, vegan diet, raw diet, whatever. I don't think any of them can be universal. I think your diet and what you need in food it changes into like who you are, space. Like me, I was a vegan until I got pregnant for the first time. And I couldn't do it. I could not do it. Like I could not literally, I know theoretically I had the books, I had done the research, all the things to eat, but I couldn't eat kale, I couldn't eat all my vegan sources of protein, so I ended up eating like a few eggs per month. I just, I couldn't do it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but actually, I just don't know. Yeah, I don't think it's any diet is the right diet.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is, as far as voluntary veganism goes, because some people might be vegan or have been throughout history just because.
In America or globally?
Well, just globally, I guess. Just like as I was just curious if it kind of had bubbled up a lot more in certain places or cultures than others. I mean, frankly, I'll be honest, yeah, I do think of it more as a white thing, and maybe that's because of, things like PETA and all the rest. When I think of vegans, I do think of, white people are the first thing that comes to mind for me. But I'm sure that's not entirely, as you talked about, it's not entirely accurate. So I guess I was just wondering around the world.
Yeah, well, like Afrocentric veganism is one of the things I look at, where this woman named Queen Afua, who has a huge following of black women in this country, she claims that black folk in Kemetic Egypt, pre-colonial Kemetic Egypt, had a raw foods vegan diet. This is before colonialism. So she makes a claim using Afrocentric research that before colonialism, before this major shift, that blacks in Kemetic Egypt ate a raw foods vegan diet. That's her theory. The work of Claudia Sarato, she's looking at indigenous decolonial veganism. So she's making the claim that also before colonialism, that most of indigenous Mexico had a very plant-centered diet, and it wasn't until they were introduced to cows and other animal products that they became more carne-centric. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I see in the last 2 years a lot of non-white folk looking back before colonialism, not necessarily to show that 100% vegan diets existed, but to show that most people who are now in white settler nations who are of non-white descent, their communities really practiced plant-centered diets, or what we consider more of a vegan diet. So, but yeah, I know even when I first heard about veganism, I thought it was just a white people thing too when I was really young. I just didn't, that was my association too, vegetarianism, veganism, going green, ethical, organic, farmers markets, that whole thing was that's what white people do. And I didn't really get it because the way it was marketed to me, the language, it just didn't, couldn't connect to the suffering of non-human animals because I was worried about my twin brother, getting racially profiled by the cops. Those are my worries. My brother's late coming home, maybe, he got pulled over because we live in an all-white neighborhood. Stuff like that, those were my concerns. So that's the language didn't quite resonate with me until I looked at Afrocentric veganism and looked at, apparently there were a time where a particular demographic of people of African descent actually practiced plant-based diets. And then I got more interested. So.
Thank you for coming.
So thank you, and I also wanted to just quickly say thank you. I'm talking really fast and I'm nervous, and there was something I really want to talk about, and is actually as a black person talking about whiteness to a predominantly white crowd. And that's something I talk about in my blog, is that I'm losing my breath and I'm getting really nervous. Because it's something that me and a lot of people of color who do this work, we talk about those anxieties, and we talk about that because we've been, for the most part, not, our work hasn't been welcome, whether it's research or if we talk about something that is whiteness or racial violence that happens to us. At least throughout my history, I've been actually punished or asked to shut up. So I just wanted to share that with you, what it means to do research about whiteness as a non-white person in a supposed post-racial age. It's not that I'm not professional, but it's something that's difficult for a lot of people of color researchers I've talked to who are doing this work. So I thought I'd share that with you as something to consider if you work with researchers of color doing this, or if you're a researcher of color and you've gone through this, that there's a lot of us who kind of dealing with trying to be calm and talking about these subjects in predominantly white spaces. So thank you for your